Thank you. I want to recount an experience I had in Chicago last Friday, Kwame, and it's not an unusual one, but I went to the immigration court to watch and to listen. And unlike reported in many parts of the media that these gotaways and others are avoiding the reach of the law in the United States, the people who were there were all there because they'd received a legal notice to appear on a status call for their claims to stay in the United States legally. They brought their families with them, and some had attorneys with them, lots of paper and the like. We know what's happening in some of these cases. These people are appearing for hearings, and the government, the federal government, ICE, is standing up and saying, we're dismissing the charges against this individual, so there's no case to consider, and at that point, detain them and deport them to the country, some country where they once lived. There was that fear in the courtroom. The only difference was the leader of the court there told me that when I announced I was coming to the building that day, the ICE agents announced that none of them were going to be around that day, so I didn't see any. Also, many of these ICE agents are masked and are not identified in any way. These people who are being detained and deported don't have any indication of formal rank of this individual, and they're stuck with it. This, to me, is a clear abandonment of basic due process in terms of what's happening to these people. We're not talking about murderers, terrorists, rapists, people with serious mental illness. You remember the litany that's been recounted to us by President Trump over and over. These are people who are trying to follow the law of America and get their day in court. And it's an awesome process to follow. I would like to ask you, each of you, if you've run into similar abuses of due process in your state and have any suggestions of what we ought to be doing.
Thank you, Senator Durbin, for your question. As you know, I'm a child of Haitian immigrants who went through the immigration process in this country and have contributed greatly to this country, as have millions of other immigrants who have come to this country, including those who are currently undocumented. The notion that the practices being used in Chicago and other municipalities to have some of those who have been complying with the immigration processes and responding to notices to appear and then being detained as a result of them complying with the immigration process is unconscionable and is the furthest thing away from what I understand as due process. There's no definition of due process. I know some have tried to indicate that the notion of due process is different in the immigration context as in others. There's no way that such deceptive practices can be defined in any way as due process. As you know, I am defending what we call the Trust Act within the state of Illinois, which makes certain that our law enforcement resources are not misused for immigration enforcement processes. I know the administration has defined their efforts on immigration as to be targeted towards criminals, but the evidence with regards to those detained reflect a different story. And indeed, each and every one of us here have historically collaborated with our federal law enforcement partners on enforcing criminal laws against citizens and non-citizens, and we will continue to do so. But the notion that these deceptive immigration practices can align with what the purported purpose of this more aggressive immigration enforcement effort is the furthest thing from the truth.
I would just say that if you followed, excuse me, if you followed the questioning that had been asked of judicial nominees over the last 2 decades that I've served on Senate Judiciary during that period of time, it has changed dramatically under the Trump administration. We are now asking nominees to the Department of Justice, even nominees to the bench, whether or not they believe an executive has to follow a court order, or whether they can defy a court order. That is so fundamental to due process and rule of law, and yet you ought to hear the answers we're receiving. A lawful court order, they'll say. Well, who decides if it's lawful? Under Marbury, we know it's the court makes that decision, and yet that I think is at the heart of whether we will face a constitutional crisis in this country.